Hello, Twitch people. We're waiting a couple minutes here for people to show up, and then we'll get started.
I
Yeah,
was
so
just figured out a way to. Oh,
what's up?
I was gonna say I was just figured out a way to open a text channel as another window.
Well, you can have the stream on another window and have a Discord
Right.
on a separate window. Are we maxed out? How many people we got right now?
Yeah, how many people?
We have 70 people right now.
Okay, how many people are
It's
able to join?
70.
Oh,
Why does it say
The
48?
the room caps
Oh,
at
we
99,
can
but I can make it unlimited.
make it unlimited because we might have
That's
more
just your
people.
stream, Sam. But Dylan's also streaming.
yeah. Like I think there's a limit on how many people can look at one stream,
Can
and
we
so
get more
Dylan's.
people to stream? Well, I guess it's fine for now because we don't have 100 people, but
Yeah, we have like
if you
45.
guys can't see Sam's stream, you can look at mine. I'm just restreaming the same thing.
Okay, we have
Yeah.
unlimited amount of people able to be in here now, right, Dylan?
Yeah, let me, I'm gonna
Okay, cool.
back up stream. Can I call myself that? So I'm at the top.
Changing your name. That would be confusing at all later.
Backup stream.
Hi guys. For everyone that's joining, we're gonna start at around 12:05, and if you are not muted, could you please mute yourself? Otherwise, someone will server mute you, unfortunately.
And that's not good because then you might be server muted forever if we don't catch you before you leave the room.
Um, before we start, if you want, Sam's gonna be doing some critique feedback on perspective drawing. If you have anything you need help on, post them in the event, art share event channel. I will link it. Art share event.
Someone says there's pretty big echo happening. I do not hear any.
Yeah, is it just me? Anybody else hearing any echo?
You have to mute the share screen
Yeah,
sound
that's
also
right.
for people wanting to
I
watch it
see.
anyway.
Also, if you have Twitch open, it's gonna echo. If you have like Twitch
Yeah,
open,
like you can hear our microphone, and then you can also hear the audio coming through the stream itself. So you might have to mute the stream.
Do people know how to mute the stream? You think, Dylan? Do you want to?
Yeah, on the screen that you're watching, on the bottom right, there's a speaker icon from the stream. Gonna have to mute that.
I'll post a screenshot in voice chat when.
Well, this is complicated. Oh my god.
Okay.
Wait, no, that looks weird on
There you
me.
go. Yeah, like there's only two streams going because there's like a limit on how many people can watch one. So Dylan's just streaming the same thing again, if you're wondering. Yeah, there's no reason to be in both. You'll see the same thing in either. All right. Okay. sounds like we're good to go. Echo problem solved.
Yeah.
You guys want to kick it off?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds
Take it away, Sam.
Okay. Okay. Hi, guys. Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about perspective. Hello. Oh my gosh. I'm going to keep an eye on the voice chat as we go. So I'm going to try and catch any questions. If you questions about something that I'm talking about right now, I'll try and catch it. So let me know if you need me to slow down or explain something again. So, okay. A little bit about me. I am currently a concept artist working in the games industry. I do a lot of environment design, which is why I have lots of practice with perspective drawing. I went to ArtCenter and graduated about 3 years ago, where I also was a perspective TA, so I'm sure some people in the crowd might have once had me as their TA. And today I'm going to talk about perspective, but not necessarily, like I would say like 70% of this is actually going to be kind of about perspective theory and perspective tools, not necessarily like the nitty-gritty of like drawing or painting perspective techniques, even though there's going to be just a little bit of that. So it's more of like a kind of high-level overview of like how to think about perspective, how to think about using it, and also kind of analyzing it in images that you see. So, all right. And yeah, if you need me to pause on something or re-explain things, I'm going to go pretty fast. There's a lot of content and I'm kind of glossing over a lot of it really quickly. So just let me know if you need me to slow down. Okay. So if there's one thing that I want you guys to think about the most, so if you leave this with only one thing, I want you to think that perspective is not just about, like, people think like, oh, perspective is like drawing buildings or like drawing like straight lines or like graphing stuff. But it's way more high level than that. Like, perspective is just a tool that artists use to create the illusion of form, right? So like, as people who draw and paint, or like you make 2D artwork, you are essentially representing something that's three-dimensional, but in a two-dimensional like medium. So perspective is just a tool that we use to convert three-dimensional things into a two-dimensional image. So everything is in perspective. If you are translating something that's three-dimensional onto like a two-dimensional canvas, you are using perspective. So here's a shot of something that like most people would say like, oh, like, yeah, is this a perspective painting? Is this a perspective drawing? Yeah, absolutely, right? Like, this is like kind of classic perspective stuff. There's like vanishing points and a horizon line and like lots of complicated buildings and all this kind of stuff. So like most people are like, yeah, that's perspective. Oh, and by the way, I've got credits to wherever I got the image in the bottom right-hand corner of the image, if you're curious. So this is from Arcane. So this is just an example. Like, yeah, that's perspective, right? We can all agree. What about something like this? Well, you can say like, yeah, like there's like buildings and stuff, right? There's like kind of some like blocky shapes going on. So yeah, I would call this like a perspective painting, right? But just for a minute, if I paint out all of the elements that you would kind of call traditional perspective elements, like the buildings and the stuff with straight lines, you can still clearly tell like everything about the position of the camera. You can still tell that like things are in front and behind each other. You know, like there's still perspective in this image, even if I got rid of all of the quote unquote perspective elements, right? Like, you can still tell that the camera's close to the ground and it's looking upwards, like all the overlaps of the shapes and everything is still telling you almost everything that you already knew with the kind of perspective elements from before. So this is still in perspective, even though it doesn't have any like buildings or straight lines in it, right? And even stuff that you might think like, oh, that's just like a character drawing. Like, that's not in perspective, right? Because it's just a character drawing. But actually, when you take a closer look, like characters or like representations of figures, 3D figures in a 2D image, that's just perspective, right? Like, that's just a 3D thing being represented as a 2D image. And so there's actually still perspective going on in something like this. There's not only is it like the form of the character in, like, if you broke down the form of the body into like basic shapes, you can still see that these shapes are in perspective. Even like he's using like the lines in the water to kind of point towards a vanishing point. So it's like stuff that you would be like, that's not a perspective painting, or that's not a perspective drawing. Like, there is still perspective going on. So if there's one thing that you leave today thinking, it's that just because something isn't a building or a cityscape or an interior doesn't mean it's not in perspective. Okay? So there's kind of like 3 classical quote unquote perspective types of perspective that you'll learn in like a perspective class if you go to like a basic perspective class. So I'll quickly go over these. If you don't know what these are, the rest of the lecture might not make as much sense. So this is like the foundational point that most people learn perspective with, right? There's 1-point perspective, which is there's a single vanishing point, and like all parallel lines recede towards the vanishing point. There's 2-point perspective, where there's 2 vanishing points. Things are kind of at a 45-degree angle to you, and there's like parallel lines recede towards 2 vanishing points. And then there's 3-point perspective, which is like 2-point perspective but tilted, where there's the 2-point perspective of the sides, and then there's a 3rd vanishing point that points downwards, right? So this is like stuff that you learn in like a basic perspective class. But I want to tell you that these are not rules. These are just tools that people teach you in order to understand perspective. But really what's going on here is it's all of these things fall under the umbrella of what I call kind of implied or intuitive perspective, which is just that you understand that things fall backwards in space at a certain rate, and you can understand depth and like 3D-ness of a 2D image. That's just if you go one step up, that's kind of the higher level version of perspective, right? Implied or intuitive perspective. So like, for instance, in these 2 images, there's no straight lines, there's no vanishing points, but you can still clearly tell that things are in front or behind each other. You can tell that things go back in space, right? So that's kind of what I want you to understand from this section. Like, all perspective is just about space. It's about form. It's about depth. All right. Is everyone with me so far? We doing okay in the stream? Cool. Okay. So, we're gonna go a little bit deeper if you guys are ready. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about eye level and horizon line. This is one of the most foundational things that you want to learn when you start moving away from kind of like measured perspective. Like, if you've ever taken like a basic perspective class, then they'll teach you things like how to find vanishing points, like measured on a page, and then use like measuring lines, and then like measure boxes and stuff. Like, that's all not very useful. It's very specific to those scenarios. And I think most of the time when you are like a concept artist or a visive artist, or you're drawing scenes, you're not going to sit there and measure boxes. That is just really inefficient. It's very it's not the way that people do things. So this kind of eye level and horizon line stuff is going to help you kind of do perspective sketching more. It's like kind of like guesstimating measurements in perspective instead of like sitting there and like measuring stuff. Okay, so eye level. Very simply, eye level just tells you how far off the ground your camera is, or like where your eyes are. So when you first start like doing perspective sketching, or you start kind of drawing things and using kind of your perspective instincts instead of measuring stuff, it's a good idea to kind of start with 5-foot eye levels, just as like a starting point, because generally you kind of live at 5-foot eye level, right? So most people's eyeballs kind of fall at around the 5-foot mark. So you're kind of very used to seeing the world in this way. Eye level tells you how tall things are. Because if you, for instance, so things that are the same height as the eye level will appear, they'll kind of line up on the horizon line, no matter how far or close to the camera they are, right? For instance, if I'm standing at 5 feet tall and my eyes are at 5 feet, like every single person whose eyes are also 5 feet, you'll see their eyes kind of line up on the horizon line. How do people who are taller view the world? Notice to be different? I don't think it's that different. I think you just see the tops of things more often. Right. So for instance, like you can think about 5-foot eye level as well as also like you can break it down proportionally. So if I am drawing something with a 5-foot eye level and I want to draw a box that's 2.5 feet, then you know that it's the top of this box is going to be halfway between the ground and the eye level. Because if you, for instance, like stacked 2.5-foot boxes on top of each other, they would land on the eye level, right? This is kind of the foundation of measuring or like estimating measurements in perspective using the eye level. So for instance, let's just say you create a composition that has a 2-foot eye level instead. So most people's kind of knees/thigh tend to land at about 2 feet tall. So if you were looking at the world from 2 feet tall, then you would kind of just see everyone's knees and thighs kind of landing on the eye level, right? Because those kind of 2-foot tall things will always land right on the horizon line. And the same thing goes for like if you want a higher eye level. If the eye level is 10 feet tall, then if every person on Earth was like standing on a 5-foot box, then you would still see all of their eyes line up on the eye level. But because like if the eye level is 10 feet tall and you don't want to like pretend that everyone's standing on a box, you can also just think like, oh, like a 5-foot person would have to be twice as tall in order for their eyes to land on the eye level. So all of these people that are kind of in this 10-foot eye level world, they're halfway between the eye level and the ground. That's how tall they are. So the eye level dictates the size and heights of objects in a scene. Objects maintain their relationship with the eye level even going back in perspective. So this is particularly useful when you're thinking about objects that are kind of built for human use. We're very sensitive to the size of things that we interact with every day. Specifically like things that are meant to they're kind of meant for human scale. So for instance, tables. Tables are usually around 2.5 feet tall, so like they'll kind of land right on your hip area. The seat of chairs will usually land right on people's knees, and the backs of chairs will be kind of slightly higher than a table height. And doors have to be like slightly taller than most normal people, so they'll usually be around like 8 feet tall, maybe. So, the height of these objects, if they were going backwards or forwards in space, they maintain this relationship with the eye level. What does that mean? Like proportionally, what does this mean? So, like, let's just take a look at this table, right? So we know that with a 5-foot eye level, if this table had a 5-foot pole on it, for instance, or like for instance, I've drawn a 2.5-foot box, the top of this box would always land right on the eye level. So if we were to, for instance, take this table and push it back in perspective, it's going to stay the same. The proportion between the distance from the eye level to the top of the table and then to the ground, that's going to stay the same, right? So if it goes back in perspective, it's going to stay like this. It's going to be halfway, halfway, halfway. And same thing with this chair. Like this chair isn't exactly halfway to the eye level, but whatever this proportion is from the eye level to the ground, the chair is going to maintain that distance. Same thing if, let's just say we change our eye level to be 2 feet tall, or 2.5 feet tall, right? Then wherever the 2.5 foot point lands on these objects, they are going to scale backwards in proportion, like the proportion of stuff that's above and below that horizon line point, the eye level point. The proportions are gonna stay the same, right? So the door or something, it's not going to like drastically change position in relationship to the eye level. Like the door is not gonna sit up here or down here, or it's gonna the eye level is gonna hit at the 2.5 foot point on the door, and then it's gonna stay there. So in practical terms, like what this means for kind of actually using like drawing in Photoshop, like a common trick that people use is that you'll grab the pivot point of an object and you'll place it somewhere on the horizon line. And then when you scale your drawing or your object around the pivot point, it's going to maintain that proportion on the eye level because that's where you've placed the pivot point of the object. So that's a kind of a way that people use to make things go back in perspective in the correct proportion. Yes, hold Alt to move the pivot point. But like this works because like things maintain their relationship with the eye level, right? So I don't want you to like be like, oh, like great, like I don't have to learn perspective now. I just have to put the pivot point on the horizon line and scale stuff. Like you should still understand why it works before you start using it, right? Okay, how are we doing? Question in the chat. Ren has corrected me. Door standard height is 6'8", except in Florida, apparently. Okay. So any questions about eye level, horizon line, while we're still here? I think we're good. Okay. I'm going to move on to lenses. Okay, so... Oh, yes.
From Ricky says, how does the camera tilt affect this?
Camera tilt. Right. So camera tilt, you can kind of think of camera tilt, like, for instance, if we... Let's say you're doing a drawing or something, and you tilt the camera such that the horizon line is like no longer on the page, right? All the same rules still apply. It's just that now the horizon line doesn't like it. Like if you just pretend like imaginarily extended your canvas, it would be the same thing, right? So if this is a 5 foot eye level and there's like a person standing here, then stuff that's on the ground that's 5 feet tall would still land on the eye level. It would just no longer be on screen, right? So a person would still be this tall. It's just that because you're tilting the camera down, you're only going to see this bottom half. Does that make sense? And like, of course, there's more things coming into play. Like when you tilt the camera, like you will start to get like vanishing points going this way. It will become a 3-point perspective. So really, like this will kind of, like the more extreme you get, like the more like this will kind of recede down in perspective. That like gets into like lensing stuff that I'm going to talk about. But that's kind of the basic idea, right? Like if you were to just like extend your canvas, the horizon, like all this like measuring stuff with the horizon line still works. It's just that it's not on screen anymore. Okay.
There's another one really quickly. How do we know how far to place objects from the viewer in perspective view, not only for eye level, but how are you remembering all these relationships when you move stuff around?
Okay, for how to remember relationships when you move stuff around, that's more of like you'll just the more you see stuff and the more you draw stuff, like the more you'll kind of remember how tall things are. Like when you're just starting out and you're like drawing stuff like chairs and tables and you won't be able to tell if something is kind of the wrong height unless you've seen it correct a bunch of times. So that's kind of just a thing that just takes practice. Like you have to kind of internalize the way that things look correctly before you are going to be good at recognizing when they're wrong. For how far do you place objects from the viewer in perspective view, that depends on the lens. So I'm going to get into that in just a minute. Yeah, you have to go outside. Or you can stay inside. I don't know. If you only draw interiors, you can just stay inside and look at all your own stuff. Okay. Oh, actually, do you have tips for getting the scale of stuff right when dealing with perspective? Yeah, like you basically just have to like draw a lot of stuff. It helps to draw things that you know are correct. So, for instance, like doing studies of stuff that are that's like perspective stuff, and like stuff that you know is accurate, like drawing pictures or working off of 3D models that you know have the correct proportions and stuff in them. Because kind of getting the instinct for how big things are when they fall back in space. It just kind of takes practice, and you just have to draw it right a bunch of times before you'll be able to kind of intuit whether or not they're wrong. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on. Okay. Lensing and field of view. So like this is a topic that I think a lot of perspective curriculum doesn't cover at the beginning. Because it's really confusing. But I think it's important because when they kind of teach you perspective at the very beginning, they don't explain this, and then it gets a bunch of people like kind of not understanding why they're doing something. So like if you've ever taken like a basic perspective class where they tell you to like draw a cube in 2-point perspective, they just tell you to put the vanishing points far apart and like off the page, right? They're like, oh, just put the vanishing points like somewhere on the horizon line, like far apart. What they don't tell you is that the distance between those two vanishing points is going to be determined by what kind of lens you're looking at the scene through, right? And this is like the lens and the vanishing points, the field of view is all dependent on the frame in which you view them. So, what does that mean? Oh, for like just a semantics thing, like lens length, field of view. In this instance, I'm going to use them interchangeably. I know people who like if you are a photographer, like you know that those are not really the same thing. But yeah, I'm going to use them interchangeably. And like having a lens length or having a field of view is kind of like a side effect of having to translate 3D things into a 2D image. Like it's impossible to perfectly represent a 3D world on 2D. Like so like lensing is just one of the consequences kind of having to do that. Okay, so what do I mean by like the frame determines the field of view? Like if we just pretend that the entire world has like a giant perspective grid on it, the smaller your frame, the longer your lens, the narrower your field of view, right? So using a telephoto lens, using a narrow field of view, it's kind of like cropping in on a small section of this entire world. So there's lots of like cinematography and like camera photography like information about like why you use certain lens lengths, like all this kind of stuff. So like what effects they have, like film plays with like field of view and lens length all the time. But for kind of the basic overview, you should know that the longer the lens, the less distance between objects as they go back in space. There's less distortion, and things fall backwards in space more slowly in proportion to each other. As opposed to an ultra-wide lens or a wide field of view, far-away objects are much smaller in proportion to something that would be the same size but close to the camera. And there's also, like Dylan says, more distortion because you can see like things are getting really like kind of stretchy because the vanishing points are so close to each other. And I've kind of like written a little thing like why would you use a certain lens versus another? Like I said, like people who do photography or like cinematographers, there's like tons of information about like why you would use each of these. But just for starters, I want you to kind of learn how to spot when this is happening and what it looks like in images. Okay, so I have some examples to kind of explain this. So this is, I would call this like, it's like a medium length lens. Like this isn't super telephoto, but this is kind of a perspective drawing. I've lined it up on the vanishing point so that you can see kind of where in this grid it is, as opposed to an image like this, which has a wider field of view. It's a wider lens, and you can see that basically they're in the same world, right? They're kind of using the same world. It's just almost like you're taking a bigger slice out of it by using a wide field of view. Does that make sense to people? Yeah. Okay. Now, 2-point perspective is like pretty easy to spot, right? Like you can kind of just be like, okay, like how far away are the vanishing points from each other in relationship to the kind of size of the canvas, right? So like if the vanishing points are very close to the edges of your paper, then it means that it's wide. If they're very far away from each other, that means it's long. Okay, 2-point perspective, that makes sense. What about 1-point perspective? 1-point perspective is kind of the same thing. It's just that it's not as easy to tell because you don't have the benefit of seeing kind of both vanishing points, right? So this small box would kind of be like a long lens, and this kind of wider box would be a more wide-angle lens. For instance, it's just that it's not as easy to tell because you don't have the benefit of seeing. Sorry, I got some echo there. Okay, so here's an example of something that is pretty wide. I'm like kind of just like guesstimating this one, right? Because it's hard to tell exactly like where it would land because you don't have the other vanishing points, but you can tell this is like a pretty wide lens because just from the proportion of things that are supposed to be the same size, right? For instance, if you take this car, we'll just pretend that like all cars in the scene are the same size, right? This car is really huge, like in terms of how much space on the screen it's taking up in proportion to a car back here that should be like the same size car, but right, it's taking like so much less of the screen space than the car up front. So that's kind of how you can tell that things are using a wider lens, like they get bigger faster as they come towards the camera. As opposed to an image like this, where like a person and a person behind them and behind them again, like you remember like how big the difference was between this foreground person or this foreground car and this background car, right? In terms of size. Now check out the difference between this foreground person and this background person. Like this one was like almost like 1/10 of the size. These two people are maybe like half, right? So that's kind of how you can feel out when things are using like what lens in a 1-point perspective grid. Let me check the chat. Reading perspective textbooks, they talk about station points. Where would the station point be in this perspective grid? Okay, I'm not super familiar with the term station point. Can you like, is station point like where the camera is standing? Or is it like every like perspective curriculum uses different terms for everything? Okay, so I'm gonna move on quickly while I wait to hear about that. Okay, and remember what I said at the beginning, like perspective is not just about buildings and like cities and stuff, even though that's the easiest to spot. Like field of view and lenses are an inherent part of any image that is representing a 3D world, right? It's just slightly more difficult to tell. So even though there's no vanishing points, quote unquote vanishing points in this image, you can still tell that this is like a pretty wide angle lens that's being used in this image, because things fall down towards the camera and get larger so quickly, right? So for instance, this diagram here is just like pretend that these are all the same distance between each other. Like let's just arbitrarily call this like 10 feet, right? So 10 feet from here to here on a wide angle lens is a huge difference in proportion to 10 feet from here to here to here to here to here to here, going back in space. Right? So in this image, you can tell that the like stuff gets so much bigger as it comes towards the camera faster, as opposed to, oops, an image like this, which is if you pretend that they're kind of in the same universe. This one is using, oops, this one is using so much less distance in between points as it goes back in space. Like 10 feet in this image would just look like this, as opposed to 10 feet coming forward in space on this wide FOV image would get bigger and bigger and bigger. So this is the same reason that if you've ever struggled with drawing ellipses in perspective, this is the same like logic that you use to draw ellipses, right? Ellipses are flat at the vanishing or at the horizon line, and then they open up and get wider. Whoopsies, my ellipses are terrible apparently. They get wider and wider and wider as they come towards the camera. And with a telephoto lens, you're kind of cropping in on only this section, right? So ellipses kind of never open up. They like never get to this point because you're cropping your image before it ever gets that big. Okay, does that make sense? Well, let me check the chat, see if there's any questions here. I think station point is where the camera is. Okay, yeah. Oh, like if you wanted to like know where the station point is, like in an image, it would just be like off the screen. Like you'd be standing on the ground somewhere, and the camera's pointing forward, right? So like if I were to do a diagram of like what this image looks like, this is a station point. You have a camera that looks like this. And a telephoto lens, the cone of vision looks like this. So you're only capturing like just this like small slice of the scene back here, right? As opposed to a wide angle lens, which looks like this. And you're capturing like way more of everything as it comes forward towards you. Does that make sense in relationship to like station point? When placing same objects in different distances, would you do it by eye in general? Yes, it depends what you're doing. Like when it comes to landscapes and stuff, like if trees are not like exactly the same height, then like no one really cares. But if you're doing like buildings, if you're doing like stuff that's like has a very like things that you're very used to seeing the correct proportion of, you will really notice if they're the wrong size. Like if tables go back in perspective and they're like suddenly like 8 feet tall, you would know. But like if you had a tree that was like 5 feet tall and you had a tree that was 8 feet tall, like no one would know. So like sometimes you need to be more precise and sometimes you can be less precise. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Do I have something else after this? I do, right. This applies to figures. Like, this confuses people all the freaking time. But figures, like drawings of figures, are using lenses as well. It's just that it's not very, like, it's not as important, you know? But people do play with this all the time. If you've ever seen, like, drawings like this, like, anime does this all the time, right? This is a TV toy, by the way. But when things come towards the camera and get really big really fast, they're using a wide angle lens to depict those characters, as opposed to in an image where things are kind of all like they're very compressed in space, like things don't get really big as they come towards you. They're using a telephoto lens to depict these characters, right? Like, people, you don't usually think about it this way, but that's kind of what's happening. Does that make sense? Yeah, organic shapes are easier to cheat. Exactly. That's why. Yeah. Yeah, like, for instance, like, you can see, like, in the image on the left, her hand is, like, ginormous in comparison to her face, right? Her hand's, like, 3 times bigger than her face, like 2 or 3 times bigger than her face. As opposed to, like, in this image where, like, I know his hand isn't coming forward as far, but, like, his face and his hand are, like, roughly the same size, right? Even though his forearm's pointing forward. So it's because, like, with the telephoto lens, like, even if things came forward, they would still kind of stay the same relative size on screen. Okay. And now where people run into trouble also all the time is that they don't realize that, like, FOV and lens length has to be consistent in the same image, right? So if you imagine like a scene that you're drawing, it's as if that scene was taken with a single camera, and that camera can only have a single lens on it when you take that picture. So all the things in the scene have to be obeying the same laws of field of view. For instance, this is, like, super imprecise, but it's about the idea of it, right? Like, if I were drawing all these cubes with a wide angle lens, you can see that these parallel lines, they are kind of really dramatic as they go back in space, right? They're kind of, whoops, 4K, I cannot draw. Okay, right, so the angle of these things going back in space is, like, it's pretty dramatic, right? And all of the objects in this scene are kind of obeying that same law, as opposed to in this image where everything, if I were shooting the same cubes but with a long lens or a narrow FOV lens, like, they would stay relatively parallel, and all the objects would stay relatively parallel. As if, like, this, like, you get into trouble when you start to do stuff like this, right? Because this is when, for instance, like, this cube was taken with, like, a 20 millimeter like lens, and this was taken with, like, a 55 millimeter lens, and these would not exist in the same scene together without some, like, serious, stuff going on. So if you've ever been confused about rotating cubes in perspective, then this is probably what's tripping you up. Okay. Cool. All right. Oh, right, I forgot I have a... Okay, so I just have one last demo to help you understand what lenses are. It's in Blender. Can everybody see the Blender window okay? Okay. Cool. So this is just like a super, super basic Blender scene, right? I've got a cube and I've got 3 cameras. And each of these cameras is using a different field of view. So, like, this one's 40. My middle one is, like, 30, I think, 60 degrees. And then this one's, like, 120 degrees, which is, like, ginormous. Okay. So in this Blender scene, all 3 cameras are using the same station point, right? Like, they're all existing in the same space together. And this is what each of the cameras looks like. This is the narrow FOV one, this is the wider one, and this is the ultra wide one. So this is what the same cube looks like taken on 3 different cameras. However, if I just zoom, like I crop in on the image, you'll realize that these are the same image, right? This looks the same. These are the same, this is the same thing. It's just that on this super wide lens, if you crop in really close, you just get a telephoto image, right? So that's what I mean by like the lens and the field of view is determined by like where the edges of your screen are. Does this make sense? I've got another one. Okay, so here's a different, this is a different file. And now instead of having all 3 cameras at the same point in space, I've moved the cameras so that the cube is taking up like a relatively the same amount of like real estate on each screen. Right, so this is like if you wanted to create the same type of image, but with a different lens, you would actually need to be physically moving the camera to get an effect like this. Does that make sense to people? Right. Okay. Awesome. Okay. All right. That's most of the heavy stuff. I'm going to do a little bit of talking about kind of like drawing and painting, and then we can have more Q&A, and then I'll look at work. Okay? We're almost done. I know I told Dylan this was going to be like 20 minutes, and it's been like 50, so sorry, Dylan. Okay. Like drawing perspective. When people start drawing things in perspective, like specifically like things that kind of exist in the real world, like the biggest issue that I like, one of the most obvious issues I see is that people don't realize how much thickness like stuff has in real life. They don't realize how much of a difference that it makes, because the more things fall back in perspective, like the more dramatic the angle, the more obvious the thicknesses become, right? So for instance, like if you had a drawing of like a door and a window, this is what it would look like without the thickness, and this is what it looks like when you add the thickness of stuff, right? Like this makes a huge difference when you're drawing things. Like this looks like as if you had like drawn a door on a wall, and this is like a door that's actually on a wall, like an actual real door and window, right? I have a coworker who kind of described this once as like the handrail theory. Like he told me, like, if you ever draw like a handrail, like people think that like that's a handrail, but really that's a handrail, right? Like you need the third line in order to show the thickness of stuff. Okay. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The next thing is like often when people draw perspective, like things that like where perspective becomes really important, like things that are in real life that people interact with, human beings are just really good at spotting when things like feel wrong, even if they can't articulate why. When you're drawing stuff, like all kinds of stuff, question whether you're drawing a thing or whether you're drawing your idea of a thing. So like here's like an idea of a chair, right? Like it's got 4 legs and a seat and it's got a back. Like that's what, like if you didn't go into specifics or like look at a piece of reference, you'd be like, that's what chair is, right? And this, people can tell, like you can say like, oh yeah, I can tell that's a chair, but people don't really believe that that's a chair. As opposed to like something like this. So you like find a picture of a chair and you draw that specific chair. There's like a bunch of things that you would never, like you could draw a billion chairs in your lifetime, and there's still things that you would find out when you draw from a piece of reference that you didn't even know. Like I've drawn like a billion chairs in my life, and I like was looking at this reference like, oh, like check out how the legs taper and how the back kind of leans back, and the back legs also lean back. Like there's this kind of stretcher that runs across the legs that supports the cushion of the chair. Like there's all these kinds of things that you would never be able to invent by yourself. Like you really need to see a reference in order to do this. And we can be even more specific, right? Like this is kind of like a generic dining chair. So like maybe if you were drawing like generic kitchen or something, like generic dining room, but you can be even more specific, right? Like this is a chair that like if you went to public school in America, like you probably sat in like one of these chairs, right? So this is super specific. Like this evokes a really specific emotion and like a really specific time period and area. Like the more specific you are, the more believable your scene is. Like nothing in real life is ever like selected by accident. Like all things that are kind of in the human environment like have been selected with very specific criteria in mind. Like like public schools bought these chairs because they were cheap and super durable and like you couldn't kill somebody with them, right? So yeah, when you're crafting your scenes, just think about this, like be specific. Okay. Painting perspective. Okay. I don't want to give you rules, right? There's no rules, there's only consequences, is something that Bill Perkins used to say. So like I want you to understand, like I'm gonna tell you these things and they're not rules, they're just tools, right? So perspective usually, often, is about conveying depth to someone who's viewing a 2D image, right? So often we want to kind of enhance the illusion of depth when you're painting in perspective as well. So this is like kind of like, these are the tools that help you craft more or less illusion of depth. So we'll just take our little like wall example from before. Here is a way to paint this wall that has very little depth. Like this is not very convincing about this wall being in 3D space, right? Like it's just, the brushstroke just goes across, it's not following the perspective lines. This is kind of, it flattens this image. Now, that's not bad necessarily, right? That's just the consequence of using this tool. So sometimes you want to do stuff like that, but what's important is that you're aware of what you're doing and you're doing it on purpose, right? So that's least depth. So here's something that has like some depth. Like this brushstroke is kind of following this line. However, it doesn't like recede with the rest of the wall. So it's kind of, there's some depth, but it's not like as much. This one's more convincing, right? Because you don't get this kind of very obvious break from things receding. So when you kind of put your brushstrokes going this way, you still get the illusion of depth that doesn't break it. And this is the most convincing, right? Like this is the most convincing version of painting this wall in perspective. Like the brush follows the perspective lines, the texture is receding. Like this is what I mean by like, these are tools, not rules. Like this is obviously the most depth, but like no one is out there like painting every single brush stroke like this and then warping it in perspective, right? Like you use certain tools when you need the extra depth. Okay, so here is like the image from the banner. And I'm just gonna point out like a couple of places where I'm using stuff like this, right? Here's exactly what I talked about before with like things having thickness. Like things that, like everything just has like a little bit of thickness in the real world, right? Like they're just like really bumpy, like this as well. Things kind of like just have like this like stepping effect. They go back in perspective just like this. All of this stuff, things have thickness, right? The more things in the image that are kind of conforming to the perspective rules, the more convincing your image will be that it is three-dimensional. And that's not always what you want, right? Like, also, like, if you were sitting here trying to make every single element be perfectly, like, in perspective and, like, following the form, you would be there for, like, years, like, warping every single brushstroke in perspective. That's not what I mean. Like, you sometimes, like, when you're sitting down and you're painting, you need to make decisions about where do I need more form and where can I get away with stuff that, like, where it doesn't matter, right? So for things like ground texture, like super, like, it does so much for your ground texture to be like following the perspective. Like, it makes everything kind of snap into place, right? So, like, I would never paint something like this directly in place in perspective. Like, everyone does this. They will paint it flat, like this. Whoops. Like, I will paint the texture flat, whatever, and then I'll bring it over here, I'll turn on my grid, and I will warp it back so that it's properly sitting in perspective, right? And I would just do that for the whole thing. Same thing for something like this. Like, I wouldn't try to kind of do this in place unless it, like, didn't matter. Like, for instance, like this door, like the, like, arrows on the door, like, probably I didn't, like, warp these into place because it didn't really matter. It's, like, not really that important. But because this is, like, such a center focal point of this image, I like drew this grid flat and then kind of warped it into place in perspective. Right? It's like, we're in those places where you really need the image to be, like, convincingly three-dimensional. That's where you go through that extra mile to, like, do stuff like that. Right? Okay. Same thing like this. Like, if you, like, like, the eye is really, like, it really likes to see one thing that's, like, very perspective-y. Is the best way I can explain it. Like a texture that is created flat and then warped into place. Like, this does a lot of convincing about the rest of the image. Like if you were to, like, zoom in on this, like, this is like nonsense, right? This, like, doesn't even look like anything. But when you get just a little bit of something in proper, like, receding properly, like, everything else kind of just, like, snaps into place. Here's more of what I was talking about with, like, thickness. Like, even just this, like, it's just one brushstroke indicating, like, the light falling on the top of the surface. And that does so much to tell you that this thing comes out and then goes down, right? Same thing here. Like, just one line of shadow tells you, like, so much about the 3D kind of ness of this object. Same here, right? And also a trick, and I think June On was the one who, like, kind of turned me onto this, but, like, your brush texture, like, if you're using a brush that has kind of visible texture, making the texture of the brush smaller as you go back in perspective will also help with that convincing of depth, right? Like, if you do a brushstroke in the front of the painting and you do a brushstroke in the back of the painting and they have the same size texture on it, you flatten the image a little bit by kind of breaking that illusion of depth. So if your brush texture gets smaller, if you size down your brush as you go back in perspective, then it just is one more thing that you can use to convince people that actually this is a 3D image. Okay. Just some closing thoughts. So, key takeaways. Perspective is a tool that creates the illusion of form and depth, right? That's, like, the biggest thing, right? Like, perspective is not, like, just, like, lines and vanishing points and stuff. Like, perspective is about creating the illusion of things being 3D, but on a 2D screen or paper or anything. When you are drawing or painting a 3D object in a 2D image, you are using perspective, whether you are aware of it or not. I have a typo. Super embarrassing. Okay. And once you know what you're doing, like, once you know that you're using a wide element lens, like, once you know that you're, like, using your brushstrokes to create depth, or you're using brushstrokes to break the illusion of depth, once you know what you're doing, you can make conscious decisions about it, right? Okay. That's my presentation. Thank you, everybody. Yay! Sorry,
Thank you very
Dylan.
much.
This definitely
No,
took
this
an
is
hour.
what? An hour is perfect. Do you wanna take a break before we do the feedback, or
Yeah, let's take 5 minutes to stretch and drink
and
some
then
water,
do you
and then I
wanna
will
do
come back.
questions first, or
Yeah,
we'll
let's
see.
do questions
Okay.
first. Okay, yeah, I see some good questions. So I will we'll do the questions. I'll come back at 1:05 and then we'll okay, I'm gonna stop the stream for now and then I'll start
Okay,
back up
yeah.
again.
So we'll take a 5 and then we'll come back.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Emil, sorry, I didn't know that you were gonna post an image. You can put that in Art Share event. So let me link you. Oh, thank you.
You guys can post work in ArtShare event if you want Sam to look at it. And I was thinking we should probably go first come, first serve, like the first
Yeah,
come,
we'll just go
first
top
serve.
down. It'll be
Yeah.
easier.
Okay, so if you want anything looked at, get it in there quick because I don't know how much Sam can do.
Hi, Twitch. Sorry, it's blank right now. We'll be right back. Sam's taking a break. If you want to join our Discord, I don't know how many people is here on Twitch. I will drop the link in the chat. And when Sam comes back, we'll take some questions and answer. Sorry, we'll answer some question and critique your perspective drawing.
See lots of questions about rotating things in perspective, which is a really good question. So I will do a quick, I'll talk quickly about that. And someone has asked me to repeat the texture brush point. I will quickly demo that as well. Oops, let me share my screen again. Yeah, studying rotating cubes while maintaining the same focal length, exercises I recommend in general. Okay, okay. So rotating stuff in perspective. Let me, here's one thing that kind of helped me understand about rotating things in perspective. Like number one, the image that someone sent. Let me see this image. Oops. this image. This is okay. This image, I understand why this is so confusing. But let's say let's say that you have a scene that's set up that's using these vanishing points, right? And you want to have something that's at 45 degrees. Like the how big, how open this cube is, or how flat this cube is, depends on your lens, right? Like if it's a telephoto lens, then this will be really flat. Like a cube will look like this, but if it's a wide lens, it will look like this, right? So that's the first thing that you need to understand is like if your whole scene is in one point perspective, you kind of don't have a reference to understand how big or small that thing will be as it comes towards the camera. So that's the first thing that you need to like decide. But like the other thing is that like 45 degrees is pretty simple when you're doing like a one point perspective, because if you imagine a cube that's in one point perspective, like a box that's in one point perspective like this, the 45 degree angle, just like because of geometry and stuff, will make their own box. Like this is like stuff you learn in VisCom, right? Like this rotated box, oops, the box that you make from connecting the halfway points of the 4 squares, that's also a box, right? Like it's like this is also a perfect square. Now that's really good for stuff that's like just 45 degrees. Like when you get to more complicated things, like doing things at like a slight angle in one direction, that is more of a question of like how far apart are the vanishing points in the scene, and they have to maintain the same proportion to each other. It's like this is hard to describe. Like let me try and like okay, let me turn this up. Let's just say that you have a box that's made like this. Here and like here. Like here's your box, right? And let's say you want to rotate it, but like only a little. Like I want to rotate like just a little bit. The distance between these two vanishing points is going to stay roughly the same as it rotates because it's the same lens, right? Like if the distance between these two vanishing points were to drastically change, like if I drew a second box and it was like rotated in perspective, but like the vanishing points were like here, it's terrible, but like this is like wrong, right? Like you can tell that's totally wrong. This isn't mathematically true, but it's like a good way to understand like when you rotate this box, like the vanishing points will kind of stay roughly the same distance apart from each other. And now these two boxes look like they live in the same world, right? Yeah, like there is a way to measure it, like because like this is the reason I say this isn't mathematically true is because like as you get towards this end, this vanishing point travels further and further and faster until it gets to infinity. But like as an artist, like that's not really helpful. It's like what you kind of generally these two things, like these two vanishing points will be like they'll kind of slide along the horizon line in like roughly the same distance. So keep the vanishing points the same distance from each other and move them left or right along the horizon. Yes, asterisk, because like mathematically that's not true. Like as you get closer and closer to like a flat face, like as you get like obviously like if you were drawing a totally flat, like it would just have no vanishing point, right? It would be like gone. There would be nothing. So at some point this line starts to travel like really, really, really far and fast. But when you're kind of working in this middle ground, it's kind of how things work. Does that answer most people's questions about like rotating cubes? Like this is a thing, like no one is sitting here like measuring this vanishing point, like how far it goes. Like it's really, the more you draw these kinds of things, the easier it will get to tell when something's wrong, right? Like if you were to like rotate it and like your rotation comes out like this, like you will be able to tell. Like it's also like how big are the faces, how much of the face shows to the camera in relationship to each other. Like that is the other thing that like will help you, like paying attention to that will help you make sure that things are still the correct proportion as they rotate. Awful. But right, like paying attention to like the proportion of this to this as it rotates will help you. Like this is obviously wrong. But does that make sense? What about if the cube is tilted? Oh, you mean like tilted as in like it's not sitting flat on the ground? Yeah, like this gets into the realm of things that are kind of like let's go back like this, right? Like at that point you're starting to get into the territory of like if you really try to measure things, like it's not even worth your time anymore. So instead it's more about like the kind of rate that these sides recede at will be kind of roughly similar across all of them. Does that make sense? Yeah, like if you were to draw like a rotated cube like this. Oops. Like the steep. I am not a Viscom teacher by any means, but like the rate at which these recede will be kind of roughly the same across the image when it's like when they're all in the same image. And of course, like this also depends on the lens, right? Like if you're using a wide angle lens, the closer things get to the camera or like up towards the camera, like the closer things get, the more extreme they'll become. Whereas if it's a telephoto lens, like things will all be kind of the same-ish. Does that make sense? Like this is, like I said, like this is getting into the realm where like it's kind of like people can't like tell just by looking that you're like mathematically like not perfectly parallel. So like you'll be able to tell when things are totally wrong, but like as long as you're kind of in the ballpark of right, like that's kind of all that matters. Yeah, anything in between, people don't really notice the difference. 0, 22.5, and 45 degrees. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Like basically, like once you start getting into like things being rotated and like angle, like yeah, like the eye will just like guesstimate the rest. Like as long as you're not like horrifically wrong. Okay. Yes, the mathematically correct way is not worth it. And like this is something that I didn't mention, but like honestly, if you're doing like tons of stuff that's like rotating and like things have to be really precise, I would just do it in 3D software. It's not worth your time to do it on paper. It's no one can tell the difference. Like once your eye is good enough that you can kind of guesstimate like when things are like look correct. If they're like 2 degrees off or like 10 degrees off, like no one can notice, no one can tell. Like as long as it looks right, then you're in the clear.
I wrote some question down, Sam, that
Okay,
might
yeah.
have been missed, and some of them I'm grouping them together too because people
Okay.
are asking similar questions.
Yeah. Let's hear them.
Do you have any advice on what kind of scene would be better suit for different lenses And another one is there a lens you tend to go to for doing your backgrounds?
Right. Like, are there certain scenes that are more suited to certain lenses? Like this,
Like when would you use each lens, I guess?
right. Like a wide angle lens, like there's like tons of cinematography and like photography information about this, but like generally wide angle lenses are pretty dramatic. Like if you're like if you see like Riot splash arts, like League of Legends splash arts, they're all done like with pretty wide angle lenses, with some exceptions. Like when they want characters to look very dramatic, if you want to like draw attention to like something in the foreground and you want it to be really big in relationship to the background, that's when you would use a wide angle lens. Telephoto lenses, like there's also like something to keep in mind is like physical location of the camera is limited when you're dealing with lensing. Like you can take a wide angle shot of like an interior, for instance, and see a lot of the interior, as opposed to if you're using a telephoto lens. Like there's only so far that the camera can physically go before it would get kind of like blocked by a wall, and then you wouldn't be able to see the like interior anymore. Yeah, like there's a ton of like cinematography like resources, like photography resources on like when to use certain lenses. Like there's all sorts of like language of lensing and stuff that I don't know about. But yeah, like if you study movie frames and you can kind of pause and look at what kind of lens they're using, if you can kind of like suss out what lens they're using and why, that's a really good exercise to do, like especially if you are already doing film studies. Also,
On that
yeah.
same note, any exercises you recommend for perspective practice?
Yeah, studying, like doing photo studies of things with the intention of understanding what's going on with the perspective there. Like not like it's one thing to like do a study of a photo and then just like copy it, like in terms of how it's working in 2D space, right? Like, okay, like the proportion of like shapes on screen, if you're just like recreating the proportion of the shapes on screen, that's one thing. But if you're actually trying to understand how things in the photograph sit in 3-dimensional space, that's a different thing. So like looking at a photo and being able to analyze what's actually going on in the space and then recreating that, not just looking at the proportion of like stuff on the 2D part of the screen. That's a good exercise. Drawing from 3D models is how I learned a lot of perspective and drawing over 3D models that are already like using correct perspective, like that the objects in the model are like the right size. That is how I like learned a lot of like intuition about like how big things are supposed to be. Okay.
Do you have any tips for getting perspective down quickly and roughly for like a plein air paintings? I think with enough time and focus, I can get it down in a big background piece, but for a 30 to 60 minute studies, it's a bit harder.
Depends what it is. Like if you're plein air painting like landscapes, it's not that like really like all you need to pay attention to is like the amount of like whether like things get smaller as they go backwards is kind of like the main thing when it comes to like stuff that doesn't have like hard lines in it. Yeah, atmospheric perspective absolutely is like a thing that matters. Like if you're plein air painting buildings or like stuff where like if the perspective is slightly wrong, it'll kind of make a big difference. I would just do the grid. Like I do this, just like on site, like quickly put in the horizon line. Like it's even easier when you're plein air because you know exactly where the camera is because it's your eyeballs. Like you're standing on the ground and like the horizon line is going to be at 5 feet. So all this stuff, like you kind of you can put it in relationship to the horizon line, and just do like a really when it comes to like plein air painting, like buildings or like stuff that's in perspective, like roads and stuff. I just take a pencil and I like draw in like a really, really basic grid, and then fill it in from there. And like all the same stuff I said about like brush strokes and stuff still applies with plein air painting. Yeah. Can I repeat that last point on brush texture? Yes. Let's just draw something really quick, like I'll just do that again or something. Okay, something like this, right? Okay, like if I like really, really want this to read in perspective, like I like this is like really, it's like really important that you see the kind of depth of this thing. Then I would go with like warping texture into place. Like it doesn't have to be like a texture that you paint or something. Like it could just be like, it could be like a photo texture. It could be like you just do your brush strokes like this, and then you just take it and you just use Photoshop warp to like put it into perspective like this. Oops. Right? Like this is the most convincing version of painting this wall, like in terms of depth, right? Because like the brush strokes are like super convincingly following the perspective, as opposed to something like this, where you were just like and then you like made it so that it's like this. Like this doesn't really follow the perspective or the form, right? Like this breaks the illusion of depth. And sometimes you want that, right? Like some styles are like almost reliant on this as like a design concept. But you know, you should be aware that you're doing it if you want to do it.
Yeah, somebody's mentioning Clip Studio and Procreate. If you set up the perspective tools, like your brush strokes can follow the grid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people are recommending ShotDeck. ShotDeck is fantastic. Like it has exactly what lens is like used in a particular shot and stuff. So yeah, it's great for studying that kind of thing. And also ShotDeck is good for like what's the mood and like purpose of using a particular lens, or like, you know, stuff like that. Like what's going on in the story right now? Like what are they trying to tell with this shot? Like, and how do they use the camera as a tool to tell you that story, right?
On that same note, any other resources you recommend for learning perspective or shot compositions or anything?
Marcus Mato-Meiska, who did
Framed
Ink. Yeah, Framed Ink has like some stuff on lenses in it, which is really good. It's like one of the only places that I could find like a good explanation of lensing for artists. So he has like a section in Framed Ink that's about it, but he also has a dedicated perspective book called something, Framed Perspective, I think it's called. It's a little bit heavy, like it's definitely for like comic book artists and people who are gonna like do a bunch of perspective by hand. Like he has this like really complicated like thing, like how to like do like bridges and perspective and stuff. And like you can learn that, but honestly, like a lot of places, like if you're trying to work in the entertainment industry, like no one's gonna do those by hand anymore. Like they'll probably use 3D software, And honestly, like learning 3D and drawing from 3D models and painting on 3D models is something that helped me a lot with like doing things in accurate, like going back in space accurately, because the 3D model, like the render, is always going to be correct, right? Because like that's just what it is. It's like a photo that you set up yourself. So
Cool. Use 3D.
yeah, I use 3D. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry if that's not what you wanted to
Blender's
hear.
taking over.
But like, it doesn't have to be Blender. Like everyone's obsessed with Blender, but like, you know, it's like
It's free.
it's just like SketchUp. SketchUp is super easy to use. It's like a great place to start. You know, it's just the program doesn't matter. Like it's just that at some point the tool is the tools become easier than like using it in a like making it in a different way, right? Like back in the old days, like they would like paint in gouache, and like for like DreamWorks movies, like you've seen all those like original gouache paintings and stuff, and people don't do that anymore because the tools have evolved in such a way that it makes that obsolete. And it's kind of the same thing for like measuring perspective of like really complicated objects, right? Like it's at some point it's like not worth your time to like measure individual bridge pylons, and it's just easier to like put an array in Blender and then take a screenshot and draw over it. Yeah, Sketchfab is good. The SketchUp warehouse, which is free, has a bunch of models, and you don't even have to use SketchUp for them. You can just like export them from SketchUp and open them in Blender if you're more used to a different program. It's a great place to find models of stuff, and then like bring them into your own scene and use them.
Oh yeah, the Blender study group.
Cool.
Should
Did
we
catch
go
all the
through
questions?
the critique?
Work.
Or
Yeah.
let's go. Can you go
Do
top
that.
down so it's first come
Yes.
first serve?
I will do that.
I think Arnold.
Okay.
Arnold is probably the first
Yes. Arnold, hello. Arnold's been my victim many times before.
one. Do you want him to talk? I guess. I don't
Yeah,
know,
if you guys want to talk,
Arnold,
you
if you
can
want
talk.
to
like,
unmute
while-
yourself,
Yeah, if you want to unmute yourself while I talk about your work, that is
and
totally
if you're not
fine
Arnold,
by
we're
me.
gonna mute you again.
Yeah, you'll get server muted, and then Gus will kill you.
Oh, not Gus.
Just kidding, just kidding. That was a kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke, you guys. Gus is very nice. Sorry, Gus.
He's not even here.
Okay. You said scaling and perspective ellipses, especially the dining area, seems a bit off to me. I don't know what it is. That feels wrong. Okay. Let's get this going. Okay. I'm about to use a tool that is super, super handy. It's by a guy named Sergey Kritsky, and I'll drop his Gumroad in the like tools channel after this. This is a perspective tool that lets you create a grid using the pen tool in Photoshop. I used to do this by hand, like to make grids from other images, but this is way better and easier.
You know, I learned that from Gus too. Gus was actually the one that taught me about how to use the pen tool to measure perspective. That's pretty cool. Because you can
Yeah,
set up
this-
the 2 points and then drag the third point around. That's pretty nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So. Okay. Let's talk about scale really quick. Oops. Okay, so the first thing, first of all, I want to say, I've seen previous backgrounds that you've done, and I think this is a lot better already than what I saw before. So I think you're making a lot of progress in a really short amount of time. So first, I want to say that's really, really awesome. In terms of the scaling, at this point, you kind of you want to decide where where is your eye level? Like what part of the image is like the true part of the image, and what part are you trying to correct, right? So like if, for instance, we're going off this console table being like the right height, then you can kind of estimate, or like the countertops, like you can kind of estimate that this eye level is like roughly 3 feet-ish, right? Like countertops usually kind of come up to like your hip, and like this is slightly higher, so like maybe 3 or 3.5 feet, something like that. Like it doesn't have to be exact. It's just that in proportion to stuff, like they have to be kind of like more similar, right? So I think the issue that's happening with your dining chairs and your dining table is that they are not the same height in relationship to the counter. So if I'm gonna pull a perspective line from here that's passing through the counter, like let's just pretend that these, like your chair is like lining up with the counter. Like it needs to be like chair backs are like tall, like as tall as or like taller than a countertop, right? So like if your eye level's 3 feet and we go down like this, like probably your chair back needs to be higher and your chair seat needs to be higher as well. Like there's, let's just pretend that the eye level is 3 feet, right? So let's just roughly split this up into like if this is 3 feet, this is 1 foot, this is 1 foot, and this is 1 foot. Your chair seat is like a foot tall, which is probably too short, right? And your chair back is about like 2 feet tall, which is also probably too short. So that's, I think, what's going on with the dining table and chairs. Like the dining table is kind of the same thing. Like if this is 3 feet, your dining table is probably like 2.5 feet, maybe. So like really it should be a little bit taller, maybe like here. As for the ellipses, it's, I think like your chairs, like this one is the one that's obviously having some trouble because it's just flat. Like this would be open like this, like if it were circular, right? And yeah, like this one's the one that's the main problem. Like this and this, like these look actually convincingly fine to me. You know, like maybe they're not like mathematically perfect ellipses, but like, you know, as long as they look convincing enough, then that's kind of all that matters. And these two look fine to me, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Like, was there any ellipse in particular that was a problem? You can talk if you want, Arnold, or you can type in the chat. I will check the chat as well. I don't see anything in the chat, but yeah, like you're kind of having a similar issue with the chair, like the sofa here. Like if this eye level's 3 feet tall, your sofa back would probably like come up to about like the same height as the counter, if you know, like depending on the type of sofa. And like the sofa seat right now, if the eye level's 3 feet, it's like lower than 1 foot. So they probably would like, so like chair seats are like usually like 2-ish feet maybe. I don't know. Like you can look all this stuff up as well, but like probably it would be around here instead. It'd be a little taller.
Sorry, I'm realizing something.
Yeah.
Talking about this, everything seems too low, and I think that shelf in the back is too tall.
Yeah, like if your eye level is actually higher, like that's what I mean. Like you have to decide like what is correct in the scene, and then everything else needs to follow it. Right. So like if the chair is correct and your eye level is actually like maybe like 4 or maybe even, it's not 5 feet, but it's like it's taller, then like your counter, the height of the cabinets needs to come down a lot. Like the refrigerator needs to be smaller, and this kind of console table needs to be lower. You know, like some of these things, like it's just like some of the elements are in one perspective, or like are following one like of size, and the rest of your elements are following like a different rule of size. So once you kind of match them up, I think that will help. Yeah, these, like, if this is like actually like a 5 foot eye level, like these cabinets are like 15 feet tall. So yeah, so it's like, it's all about the eye level. Like how tall is the eye level? Just like set it as a fact, be like, it's 5 feet tall. And then everything that's 5 feet will like land on this 5 foot eye level, right? Like the fridge, like if the fridge handle is like at 5 feet, that's really high, right? So it would actually, like 5 feet is probably like your fridge would be like here.
Arnold said the ellipses are on the lamp and the plant vase.
Okay, the lamp.
It's a lamp in the living area between the chairs.
Oh, here. Oh, like I wouldn't really worry about this. Like I think, like you know, it's such a small part of your image. Like if we're talking about the overall thing, like I think it's like convincing enough. You know, if you want to get like really technical about it, like you can do the thing where it's like how wide do the ellipses open up as you get further away from the horizon line, and then like map over here, like how open would this ellipse be? And like same thing with this, like you would draw the minor axis of the ellipse and then do this and this and this and then actually connect them, right? So just, I think, but like, yeah, I think this is all right. The bases, I think you're talking about these ones, right? Like it's kind of mostly fine, honestly. Like maybe the only thing, like it's one of those things, like how much the ellipse opens coming away from the horizon line, like depends on the lens, but also like depends on what you're trying to do. Like if you like the most important part, like when you're drawing forms that have ellipses on the top and the bottom, is that the top one is smaller than the bottom one, like in terms of how open it is. And even if that's not technically correct, like the look of this is going to be convincing enough, even if this ellipse is larger, like more open than it would like mathematically supposed to be, or like this one's like more closed than it would mathematically supposed to be, as long as you're convincing the eye that this thing is like falling away from the horizon line and like the ellipses are getting bigger as they get away from it, that's the important part. That's what I'd say about that. But yeah, I think the scale, like I think once you sort the scale issue, like the rest of things will kind of feel better as well. Okay. Cool. Next up. Okay. I saw this earlier. This looks awesome. Honestly, I don't think there's a lot to say, like from a perspective point of view here. Right? Like I think it's like, even if there's some things that are slightly off, like it almost doesn't matter, because as long as the perspective is convincing enough, and it doesn't get in the way of the image, then that's like the most important thing, right? Like I wouldn't say anything about like perspective being like any like perspective issues, because I think that everything is kind of basically right here. But I would, like, the thing I would say is, what is this for? And like, how are you going to see, like, this is not even about perspective at this point. This is just like a environment design question, really. Like, what is this for, and how are you actually going to see this space when it's in the medium that it's meant to be in? Like, like if this is a set for like a film or like a game, you're almost never going to see things from this angle, like from this top kind of shoebox angle, right? This is just like a tool that we use to help design the space. And what the next step, if you haven't already done something like this, like I haven't checked your portfolio website that you dropped in the chat as well, but like the next thing that I would think about is like, does this design for this environment work from a camera perspective, the way that you would actually see the space when you were interacting with it, the way that whoever's going to like see this is going to, right? Like, does this room make sense and look good, have like a good visual composition from the actual camera angle that you would see it? And also like, what's the practical uses of, like in terms of the production, I mean, like if, let's say, so I work in games, so like what some of the things that we have to think about all the time is like, can the player walk in the space? Because that's like the only, like that's the most important thing. Like, is there enough space for the player to like walk around and like go somewhere and then like walk somewhere? And then the next thing that we think about is like, while they're walking around the space, what does it look like to them from the camera, the actual player camera, right? Like, does it, like, you can have the most beautiful looking environment, but when you actually get into the camera that you're going to see that environment from, that's the only thing that matters. Like, the person who's playing the game is never going to see it like this. They're only ever going to see it from the camera.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
First of all, thanks. Sorry, I'm hearing my. That's hard to talk.
No worries.
So if I wanted to put this in my portfolio as is, would it be good to put in a few like different shots showing the same room but from a character point of view, like you're saying, so that it feels more useful?
Yeah, like it depends like what you're trying to use the portfolio for. Like, are you interested in like working in animation or games, or like, do you know?
Yeah, so I just really like environment design, and this probably isn't the best answer, but I like games and film, maybe even TV, but this specific layout I was thinking was for a game.
Okay. Yeah, like I think it would, like, if you're gonna put this in your portfolio and you're imagining this as part of a game that has like a first or third person camera, then that's what I would do. Like I would have this as like a design to like kind of show your thinking about how you set design the space, and you dress it and you think about the prop designs, and then it would be like great to have like a shot that shows how shows how this environment looks, like the way that you would actually see it in the game. So like if that's a third person game, like you would see it from a third person camera. If it's a first person game, you would see it from the first person camera. Like, because like this is like the design part, like this is the part that like that's for you, kind of like for you to design the space. And then the other shot would be like, how does the player experience the space? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
This is just a slightly broader question, and it should be short. But in terms of my portfolio, since you just glanced at it, is it fine to keep having this like variety of games versus film kind of artworks, or should I try and buckle down and be like, I'm a video game portfolio artist?
Whoops. Like it's I'm hesitant to like tell you like exactly what's right or wrong, because it really depends. Like, especially for games, the thing is like the game industry is so different from place to place. Like things that will absolutely get you hired at one studio will like make like won't even get looked at in another studio. Like you can tailor your portfolio as much as you can to something specific that you want. But like, by doing that, you're also narrowing your chances of getting looked at by other places. So it's kind of a personal choice, really. Like, like do I want to appeal to a broader variety of places and like maybe reduce my chance of being the perfect fit for any one place? Or do I want to lean really hard and try and get a specific type of job, like at a specific like type of studio, and have a really good chance of getting in because my portfolio is exactly what they're looking for, but also then probably reduce my chances of getting looked at by somewhere else?
Gotcha. That's really helpful.
Okay, I'm glad. Yeah, game industry is hard. Like it's just that like everyone's looking for something different. Everyone's looking only for exactly what they need. And like, you know, like you can't be that for everyone, even if you are actually capable of it, right? Like a lot of people are actually capable of being an artist that a studio needs. It's just that like they just never get the chance to do it because the studio will look at their portfolio and they'll be like that's not what we're looking for. Even if you could do it, they'll be like, we don't want to take the chance that you can't, right? So yeah.
Gotcha. That's really interesting. Thanks so much for the little portfolio review. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Hope that helps.
Sam, can I just ask, what did you do for your portfolio? Is it specific or more generic?
I was more generic. Yeah, like my portfolio was more generic. And like it's like when you're trying to get into the game industry, the smaller the studio, the like less likely they are to take a chance on training someone. The bigger the studio, like the more willing that they are to like hire someone who maybe doesn't exactly fit what they want, but they want to turn you into something that's perfect for them. So yeah, that's kind of what happened to me because like I had a portfolio that wasn't exactly what they were looking for when I got hired, but they like saw the skills in my portfolio and they're like, we can work with this and turn this into kind of exactly what we want from this role. Yeah. It's so much luck, you guys. It's so much luck. Like everyone tells you that they have answers for like how to get a job and like what to put in your portfolio, and the truth is that you just have to put yourself out there a lot. And if your work is professional quality and you're capable of like you have the skills and you can demonstrate those skills, like you just have to find someone that's hiring someone with that skill set. Like it, like the like portfolio stuff, like which pieces to put in your portfolio, and like what kind of things, like what style you have, what all this stuff is like. It's the last 10% of the portfolio thing. Like the 90% is like your skills and like do you understand like what the purpose of your artwork is in the broad scheme of them making whatever it is that they're making, whether it's like a movie, whether it's a TV show or a video game. Like they're making a thing and your artwork helps them make that thing in a specific way. And once you understand that, then you can kind of, you know, be like, show them like, this is how I help you make the thing that you're trying to make, right? It's like people, when they make art at the beginning, they just make art for themselves, or they copy artwork without realizing what that artwork was used for in the production. So that's my portfolio advice. Hopefully that helps some people.
Cool.
Okay.
Let's go on to the
I'm
next
going to
one.
do the next piece. This looks like James and the Giant Peach to me. Very cool.
Stephanie, right? Stephanie here? You can talk or you can type, or up to you. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, you can talk if you want. Like, this looks really good to me. Like, let me put in a horizon line.
Oh, really quickly, what is that tool again?
Oh, I think someone dropped it in chat earlier. I saw. I will post it again. It's by this guy named Sergey Kritsky. It's called Perspective Tools, I think.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. I think Ren posted it. Oh,
Yeah, Ren posted it in the chat, and I will drop it again in the tools and studios. This thing is so good. It's like $5 or something, and I use it every day, and everyone on my team uses it. So like, it's just so worth your money, you guys. It's so worth it. Okay, so like, yeah, like you mentioned, like this is a really organic piece. So like, it's kind of more of those things that I've talked about like how things recede towards you in space. And of course, like this is even more complicated because it's not flat, right? Like the ground is going up and it's going down and kind of up again. So like you like I wouldn't worry about like hardcore perspective stuff here. Like it's really more about like what are you like, where are you trying to be convincing about depth, and how can the perspective help you achieve that? Like, for instance, like this peach up here, like it's really high up, like the camera is very low, and you have a really low horizon line. So you would like really be looking up at this, right? So you would kind of like, peaches don't have like circumference rings, but like, you want to convince the viewer that you're standing underneath this. And like whether you do that with like brushwork, or whether you do that with lighting, or whether you do that with, like those are just things, that tools that you use to help say something, and like you have to decide like what it is you want to say. I know it's like really nebulous advice, but like I think this piece is like really good already. Like I think like, there's like other stuff, like just like small stuff, like the clouds probably also would recede in perspective like a little bit more. Like they would get really small towards the horizon line and like get kind of bigger as they get further away. And like if you want to help convince the viewer about the depth of this piece, or if you even want to use the clouds as like a compositional tool to draw your eye towards this focal point, like those are all decisions that you can make. And then like these are just the tools that are going to help you achieve whatever it is that decision that you made. Right? Like the other thing I'd say is like I would think a little bit about like what is the actual form of this thing here that's going on in the foreground, right? Like is it like this part's really clear because you have these shadows that are helping describe the actual form of this path as it goes back. Like it's kind of like scooped like this. And it kind of goes maybe like over this hill, right? So like you have these elements, and like these elements that are like getting smaller, and then they will get smaller and smaller and smaller as they go back in space. Like this part's pretty convincing. And then once you get here, it's like you kind of didn't decide what the shape of like what the 3D shape of this part is going to look like. Like, does it look like this? And like this? Like, does it look like this? Or does it look like this? Like it's like unclear here, and especially here. Like this, the way I kind of see it in my view is that it kind of goes like this, right? Like this thing comes like towards you in space. And if that's the case, then you want to use the tools, like you want to use the brushworks and the textures and the grasses and stuff. You want to use that to convince the eye that this is actually coming forward in space towards your face, so like towards the camera. So like the grass here would probably get pretty big as it comes towards you because it's starting to get really close. And also, like you can use the grass and like all the elements to kind of like shape the form of the like it's the grass can kind of create this almost imaginary form line as it wraps around this object in space. And then this will just be convincing, like it'll help convince the eye about like what exactly this shape is here in the foreground. And like these ones as well, right? Oh, and probably I would resolve this. Think about resolving this like cliff. Like I think it will just help you to just like sit down and just like decide what is the actual shape of the like thing here. Like is it going like this and then down, and like what's going on here exactly? Like what's the form like? And then like once you have that figured out, then all you have to do is like follow this instruction with your painting. Does that help at all?
Yes, it helps a lot. Thank you so much. I think
Okay.
because of all the organic, it's horizon line too, but having the jaw super helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, like this part looks all really great. Like you've got the form and everything like going so well up here. You just have to I would just like continue it down here and resolve it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. I kind of mostly answered that rotation question. Okay.
Yeah, I think Ash is next.
Yes. Ooh, it's big. Okay. Okay. I think. I think like this is a similar kind of case where like you have kind of the idea of the form and the like where things are sitting in actual space like pretty good on these elements. And when you get over here, you're kind of like you're not as clear anymore about like where things are sitting. I think like this is a thing that it's just like as things come closer towards the camera, you start to think of them as like shapes being kind of like stuck to the screen instead of like objects that are in the world. So I think it might just help to kind of decide like what's the form of what's going on here and how are things sitting in space, because like in proportion to these flowers, like if these are the same flowers as these flowers, then these are really big, right? They're like if these flowers are like a couple inches tall, like these ones are like 3 feet tall. So like are these sitting on the ground? Like it's possible for them to be this big on screen. It's just that they would have to be super close to the camera to get to that size, right? But like if your intention is for these flowers to actually be sitting on the ground right here, then they would actually probably be a lot smaller.
Yeah, I
like
was
this.
trying to have the rock and the flowers in the front be like a lot closer to the camera compared to everything else.
Okay, like is this rock meant to be sitting on the ground right here?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think they like the way that it's set up, like this just feels kind of still too big, like in relation to the rest of the rules of the painting. Like I think like this, like for rocks it like doesn't really matter. Like rocks can be all sorts of size, right? So like this could just be a really big rock. But when you repeat an element in an image, you're giving the viewer information about how, like, what the relationship of those things are. So, like, these flowers are the same size as these flowers, and if you repeated this flower again, like here, like, now you're giving the viewer, like, a lot of information about how big these things are. And then when you put this one in, and it's the same flower as this one, you're kind of breaking the information that you gave about these ones being the same size because this one is so big. Does that make sense? Like there's like a way, like here, if you really wanted to like measure it out, like you could kind of kind of be like, how tall is this flower? Like we're just gonna like super roughly guesstimate, right? Like we're gonna say like this and this. Like if there was ground over here and the flowers were resting on the ground right here, like based on what you've told me about the size of this flower, it would be this big.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really helpful.
Okay. Yeah, like this kind of like perspective line stuff, like it's not like measury, like it's like you're not really measuring the size of the flower, right? You're just like kind of guesstimating like, oh, like if I were to make this be forward here, like how big would it actually be, right? And like it's just that the difference is so big with this one to this one that it kind of breaks that pattern.
Okay.
I think if that flower in the foreground is really important to you and you want it to be there, we would have to suggest that the ground plane is going up somehow as it gets closer to the front. So we would need more information on the ground. Yeah.
It's like what's more important to you in this image, like the size of the flower, or is it just that you wanted something in the foreground that is like kind of, you know, continues this, right? So cat. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right.
Hey.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sorry,
Hope that helped.
For this whip.
Whip. Okay. Oh my god. Does someone unmute the entrance spot?
I apologize. I was like, oh no.
Who did this?
I'll make sure it stays really
good.
Wait, was that cat?
Oops. Like, you guys, this tool is so helpful. Like, I do a lot of photo bashing for work. This tool is so helpful when you need to merge like multiple perspectives or like start from a 3D model and then like extrapolate a grid from that. Like I used to do it manually with like pen tool and like if the vanishing points were off the page, that was like 10 times harder. Like you can do it manually, but like the tool is just okay. So there's some things that are like kind of just not in, they're just like not quite following the grid. And it's they could be like this, right? Like they could be off, but because they're only slightly off, it's hard to tell whether they're off on purpose or whether they're just wrong. Like this and this and this one, right? Like this bench especially, like it's possible for them to be slightly rotated, but because they're slightly rotated only very slightly, like it's like, oh, is this not in perspective properly, or did you rotate them on purpose, right? So I would just decide like and if you are deliberately trying to rotate them, then I would just go all the way and like rotate them so much that you wouldn't think that it's an accident. That's wrong.
I see.
Right? Like this is now clearly just meant to be rotated. Like I think the oopsies didn't like that. I think your vanishing points might be on different levels. Yeah, so your camera is tilted. That's not, again, it's possible, but like, did you want it to be tilted, right? That's kind of the question. Like, let's move this.
Yeah, I don't think I remember if I made it tilted. I'm not sure.
Yeah, like I don't see any reason why you would want to do that. Like there's times when you want to Dutch the angle for like dramatic purposes, but like since this is kind of just an environment shot, and it's pretty straightforward, like in terms of like the mood of it, like I don't think you were. I probably like there's no reason to tilt it unless you're trying to say something really specific. So like probably these lines might want to follow that grid a little bit more, but. Yeah. Other than that, I think like this is going really well. I think like is this Japanese tavern? Okay. Yeah, like one thing I would say that's kind of like the next level of thinking about this kind of stuff is also like architecturally what's going on with the structure of the building. If you look at references of like old-timey buildings, like they didn't really have materials that could span really far distances. So like this is not even a drawing thing anymore. This is just like how you can take the design of an environment to the next level. Because like what I said about like specificity being bullyable, like these kind of like super specific structural and architectural and prop design choices can really help convince people that like a space is real, even if they don't actually understand like what's going on. Like they might not understand architecture or structure, but when they see those things in an image, like it clicks for them that it's like, you know, more convincing. So yeah, like things built in like the old-timey timies, like they couldn't span like very far distances with materials before needing to support them with something. So like the way that roof structures work, I haven't studied Japanese architecture, so I don't know if this is true, like, but like in the kind of general idea is that you will have posts that support a beam of some kind, right? And the length of this beam is determined by how strong this material is before it snaps. So the distance between posts is longer with more advanced building materials like steel, and they're shorter with building materials like wood. Because you can even imagine like back in the day, like you would have to cut down like a ginormous tree to like span a super long distance in like an architectural distance, right? Because like you couldn't just like glue two pieces of wood together in the middle and then use it as a beam. Like that would fail structurally, or like they would have to like laminate them together or something. So yeah, so probably they would have to have like a shorter distance in between these beams, and then they would run rafters or joists across in the other direction. So you would have multiple beams with posts supporting the beams, and then you would run rafters or joists across them, like horizontal, like perpendicularly, in order to get this kind of structure to support a floor or a roof. All that is to say, like this beam, like probably like if you can imagine, like if this was like a load-bearing beam, the weight of this beam falling right here, like if it just ends here and doesn't connect to the ground, then it's not doing its job to lift up the roof, right? Like this is all tiny. It's like I'm not saying like you should just put a beam right here and like block your door and like mess up your composition, but it's just like when you design environments, especially interiors, like the architecture and the engineering of what's going on like plays a really big role in how the space is organized, is all I want to say. Because I think this is looking really good. You know what you're doing. Like all this is looking cool and fun, and you know, there's just like those tiny perspective things. I think it's like the next level of storytelling in environments is like thinking about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's super helpful.
Okay, I'm glad. Was there any like perspective thing in particular that you wanted me to look at here?
I think I just kind of hated this round table and the chairs underneath it.
Mm.
And I think I wanted to squeeze in another round table, and I guess to scale, I wasn't sure how to plot another round table closer to the door.
Like here?
Yeah. I think it was,
You could always just like do this.
yeah.
Like you could just measure an arbitrary point. Like if you wanted the tables to be the same size, right? Like you could just measure an arbitrary point. Like actually, if you wanted it to be like let's say like you want this to land on the ground here.
Yeah.
So once you have your grid, all you have to do is connect those two, and like this is like the top, right? And if this is the top, then this is where the center of that table would fall.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can project the sides of the table
Yeah.
over. Yeah, and then like and then like it would be like here, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
if you wanted to kind of measure it out, you could do that. And it would kind of be like here-ish.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Okay. Let's see. That's it. I think that's all of them.
There's a question about, can you show us how you use those perspective tools?
Yes. Yes, I can. Well, okay, I'll just do it again on Kat's drawing. Okay, so the perspective tool runs off like the like pen lines. So there's like a bunch of functions as well. Like there's a bunch of other functions, like it will warp like smart objects into line with your perspective grid and all this kind of stuff, but I never use it because it's a little bit buggy. The number one thing that I use it for is literally just extrapolating perspective grids from existing images. So the fastest way to do that is literally just like find two lines in the image that are supposed to be parallel. Like for instance, I'll use the edge of this banister and the floor here, and you just do one line that is following the top one. Control click using the pen tool to reset it so that you're not making one continuous line, because then you'll just make like a Z. And then click again. You can use A, which is the like pen select tool, to grab the individual points and kind of make sure that they're in exactly the spot you want them to. And once you have these two lines, you just hit the grid button, and then it will think for a second, and then it will make a grid based on those two pen lines. So that's one. And because this one has 2-point perspective, I'll make a second one, doing the same thing. Do that again. And then, there you go. That's the grid.
Wow.
And then, yeah, like, and also like what it will do is like, if you have one grid, you can find the horizon line using that grid. Like it will just make a horizon line on the vanishing point, and then I'll do like a 1-point perspective grid. And then, yeah, it's like I used to do this like the old way, which was like you'd like sit here and you'd use the line tool, and then you'd like draw the line, and then you'd like draw another line, and then you'd like find where they intersected off the page, and then you would like put grid lines there, like to the grid, or like, and then you'd like, oh, that's the vanishing point, and then you'd draw like the rest of the grid. Like, yeah, that's how I used to do it manually, or like Dylan like used the pen tool for that. Like, yeah, there's ways to do it manually, but this is basically just doing that but automated. I know. I love him so much though. Like I just want that guy to like keep supporting his like tools, because I'm really scared that one day Photoshop is gonna like update and he's gonna like not like update the tools to like go with it. And then it will just be, I will just have to like stay on like whatever version of Photoshop the tools are supported on. That will just be my life. Yeah, I know. I'm gonna try not to jinx it.
I think so. Is there anything else? This has been amazing, Sam.
Thank you. I'm sorry it's been so long, but like,
No, this
yeah.
is
Glad.
perfect.
Really glad that
People
found
want
it
more.
helpful.
Several
Thank you
people
guys
are
for coming.
typing.
So yeah, like if you don't know, I hang out in the server, and like if you have perspective questions or like other questions, you can ping me. I do know things that aren't just perspective occasionally.
Don't talk about ArtCenter.
No.
Don't bring it up.
No, not that. I didn't say.
Cool. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Hope you all have a fantastic weekend.
You too.
And I'll see you guys around.
Yeah, I guess we'll be signing out. If you guys still want to hang out, we can join on the channel. But we will be leaving. And I'll probably be back later today. So.
And then if you want to rewatch this, I'm
all
pretty
right.
sure that it's going to be on Twitch, right?
Yeah, here, this is the...
On Dylan's Twitch.
Yes.
We'll make sure that we post that link.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you guys. Goodbye, everybody.
Later.